very low voice of a steam locomotive's hooter whistle is a haunting yet mighty sound, and it's a good clue on what we will feature in this episode of the Southern Saga. We are about to hear southern giants in the Great Smoky Mountains of the Carolinas. The sound you listened to a moment ago is a Southern Railway flat-top bootleg whistle, typical of the engines you are about to hear. This is all part of the 10th episode of Season 2 of the Revival Steam podcast. I am Alec Butler. I am this fictional railroad-related podcast sound editor, host, and narrator. It makes you imagine what a world of steam-powered revenue American trains, pulled by new and improved steam locomotives, will look and sound like. This is our second to last episode with the Southern Railway steam fleet. In most of this episode, you will hear the Southern's largest steam locomotives, the LS Class 2882 Chesapeake locomotives. You will also listen to a few conventional steam locomotives, as we are in western and central North Carolina. This is taking place during the Memorial Day weekend in May. At this point, many college students are on their long summer break, and high school graduates make most of their time before starting college. This late May RS event suits them nicely. We are about to go out in a big way with these large Southern engines. So relax in your chair, grab a bag of popcorn, and close your eyes. Let's imagine the sight of an all-Southern Railway RS event with the biggest engines the railroad ever owned. The Southern Chesapeake locomotives of the future are ready to show off their whistles and power. So listen and enjoy. We begin the action on Saturday, May 24th. We traveled down to Morristown, Tennessee, the previous day from Michigan, and we are at the junction where the line to Asheville, North Carolina joins the Knoxville to Bristol, Virginia line. It is around 9 a.m., and the first train to approach the junction is the Asheville Flyer, as it heads onto the line to Asheville. Famed Southern excursion star Mikado, number 4501, is heading the train. Once the train passes, we get to our cars and travel to the outskirts of Asheville for nearly 2 hours. The train can be heard taking a long approach to the yard. It slows down when contacting the yardmaster for permission to enter. He gives the train the green light. Enjoy the action. The next train we will hear is an eastbound freight ferry move pulled by next-in-class MS1 Mike number 4775. These are extra trains that get engines either to their starting points of duty, or in this case for 4775, getting to the locomotive shop for repairs. We first hear the freight chugging hard up the grade out of Asheville as it has a long climb to the summit near the loops. Then, after some careful driving through the mountains, we hear the train as it glides through Old Fort. 4775 has a nice southern squealy 3-chime whistle. Enjoy. We next travel to the east side of the loops to hear one of the Ars-related bio-coal trains heading from Salisbury to Chattanooga. As mentioned in a previous episode, this train drops off hoppers filled with biofuel for the power plants and fills the fuel stations for the other steamers. Today's power is a pair of next-in-class LS2 2882 Chesapeake locomotives. Number 4060 is in the lead, and 4062 is pushing the train at the rear. These engines represent 8 of the class, number 4051 to 4058, built by Baldwin in 1928. Listen to these southern giants work up a storm, hauling this bio-coal train around the loops. After this train, we travel to the west side of the loops to capture a few more movements. The next train is another bio-coal train, but this time it is empty. Pulling these empty hoppers is another pair of next-in-class LS2 Chesapeake locomotives, with number 4063 leading and 4066 as the rear pusher. These engines and 2 more sisters have the center headlight configuration on the front of the smoke box of the engine. This area of the Southern Railway is a great place to watch trains. Let's hope that the line will see a revival in activity someday. At this point, it is 3 p.m. We return to Asheville to chase the same Asheville Flyer train with number 4501. It is on its return trip back to Knoxville. The engine will have a different whistle as there was a crack on the other whistle we heard earlier. We hear the train speed towards Morristown Junction, where it will move onto the Bristol-Knoxville line. After passing the junction, we hear the train picking up speed as it continues towards Knoxville. After this, we will head to a nearby hotel for the night, after an excellent start to this operation. The following day is Sunday, May 25th, and we travel from Morristown back to Asheville for much of the morning. We will catch only 4 trains today on both sides of the loops. Heading downgrade on the west side of the loops at around noon, a few minutes after we arrived, is a light engine. It is centered headlight next in class LS2 Chesapeake number 4065. It is drifting nicely down to Asheville to wait for its next job. Now we are at the top of the loops. We hear another train working its way uphill from the west. This is NS Local Freight P87. This train's power is another centered headlight next in class LS2 number 4064. The arduous climb from Asheville is almost over, and the Southern Chesapeake will have an easier time drifting downhill past the loops as it heads towards Old Fort for a water stop before continuing on to Bridgewater, North Carolina. Speaking of Old Fort, that is where we will set up next later in the afternoon. It is around 5 p.m. as the sun begins its descent. Coming down from the loops is our first tribute Chesapeake for this episode. This is LS1 number 4019, which represents 7 of the class number 4016 to 4022, which were built by Baldwin in 1924. The original number 4019 was the only Southern Chesapeake with a centered headlight in front of the smoke box. The engine is leading a ferry move from Asheville to Spencer, where it is scheduled to undergo some inspection. We are lucky to hear this engine as it glides past the station in Old Fort. A half an hour will pass before our last train of the day appears as it heads for the grade to the loops. This is Ennis Local Freight P60, coming from Hickory. Leading the train is another tribute to Chesapeake LS2, number 4056. The engine will have a late evening run back east. After this train passes, we will head back to Asheville to spend a few nights as we continue our itinerary with more Southern Giants to follow for the next several sound segments. The next day is Monday, May 26, Memorial Day. It is early, just 2 hours before the sun will appear, but plenty of activity will be at the Asheville Engine Terminal and the yard. The engines we will hear in the first soundtrack are tribute engines. The first is TS1 482 number 1490, which drifts by us as it heads towards the service track from one of the museum shop stalls. The engine is unusual because it has an automatic bell ringer. Also distinctive is the next engine. This is LS2680 number 4002, which represents a pair of these engines with this wheel arrangement Baldwin built in 1911. This wheel arrangement was less successful on the Southern than it was on the Great Northern Railroad. We hear number 4002 switching the yard as P63, the Asheville switcher. We then hear two trains in one place simultaneously. First, you will listen to tribute LS1 2882 number 4022 whistling to the flagman and then depart eastward with NS Freight P87. But as the train moves towards us, we hear another whistle in the background. This is the sound of NS Local Freight T34 arriving in Asheville from Knoxville, Tennessee. LS2 number 4051 pulls the train into the yard to finish its run before its next assignment. I know this is a lot to explain, but the action of Southern steam in the Asheville yard early in the morning is a moment worth recreating. The Chesapeake locomotives are not only assigned to run trains east and west of Asheville, they are also assigned to the line of the Blue Ridge Southern heading southeast to Hendersonville, North Carolina. A half an hour has passed, and now we drive over to the junction where the NS line between Asheville and Salisbury diverges with the Blue Ridge Southern line. We captured two of the BRS trains as they move slowly past us. The first is W44, pulled by Tribute LS1 Chesapeake number 4021. It is on its way to Arden, where it will pick up more cars for a nice run down to Hendersonville. 15 minutes later, we hear the second train approaching. This is another Blue Ridge Southern freight, T59. It is being handled by a next-in-class LS2680 number 4004. It is also on its way to Hendersonville. Quite a unique experience of articulated locomotives in action on this early morning. Little action is happening during the day, so we will hike in the nearby Pisgah National Forest and rest at our hotel until sunset. Then we will head back onto the west side of the loops to hear 2 trains. The first one is the returning P-87 from Bridgewater. To our surprise, a different Southern Chesapeake is handling the train. This is Tribute LS2 number 4050. We are told that P-87 exchanged power in Bridgewater during the switching. 4022 pulled P-87 as part of a ferry move to Salisbury, while number 4050 took over and will proceed down into Asheville for duty. With rods clanking, number 4050 drifts by us as it heads to Asheville for a rest. Then, 20 minutes later, we hear the last movement of the day as another LS2 Tribute, number 4052, runs light as it heads to Asheville after repairs at the Spencer shops. The valley echoes wonderfully with the flat-top bootleg whistle from number 4052, as it was common on the Southern Chesapeake locomotives. This is the most haunting moment of this trip. It is Tuesday, May 27th, and we are on the east side of the loops again in the late afternoon. This is after we went bowling at a local alley. We are trying to catch NS local freight P60, which the crew usually gets on duty at 5:30 p.m. Tribute LS2 locomotives number 4054 at the front and 4053 shoving work together on this train as they tackle the steep grade to the loops in grand fashion. Then at 6 p.m., we hear another train coming down the hill. It is NSP87 again, and our friend, Tribute LS1 number 4021, is taking her turn on this train. This may not seem like much action today, but this is how we work around the regular NS freight schedule. For now, enjoy pure Southern Chesapeake action. Our last soundtracks at the loops are again on the east side in the early morning of Wednesday, May 28th, as the sun's rays are about to hit the area. The first train to come along, charging up the grade, is another bio-coal train with fuel for power plants and locomotive fueling depots to the west. The power for this train is another doubleheader, with next-in-class LS1 centered headlight locomotives, number 4027 and 4029. Leader 4027 gives us a good whistle display from its flat-top bootleg whistle, as it and its sister muscle their train up the hill in the most spectacular scene from this trip. Then, 25 minutes later, yet another doubleheader with Southern Chesapeake locomotives eased down the grade with a heavier NSP-87. They are Tribute LS2s number 4056 and 4057. It was a challenging climb for them, and now they are easing down carefully with rods clanking as they head for Old Fort for a water stop and continue to Bridgewater. This is quite a finale at the loops before returning home. It was a big event with the largest of the Southern Railway steamers, but we have one more episode which includes a clue to what saga we will feature after the Southern Saga. In that episode, we will visit the states of Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and Virginia as part of our last episode of the Southern Saga. To end it all, I credit Jay Wynn, Mobile Fidelity Records, and Green Frog Productions for allowing me to use the sounds you heard to make this episode possible. I would also like to credit my Aunt Elizabeth Tremblay for her hard work editing my scripts. I look forward to our next adventure, the last on the Southern Railway. So with that, nothing else needs to be said. This is Alec Butler of Revival Steam. We will see you next time.